All right, guys, we are back in my garage for another another video. And today we're going to be talking about upgraded turbos and why we are asking the wrong questions when we try to decide on a turbo upgrade. And I get it. This is a really big investment, so you want to do a lot of research to make sure you're not going to regret your decision. But a lot of what we're asking isn't really giving us useful information, and honestly, it is just extremely difficult to describe the driving experience when you upgrade your turbo. So in this video, I'm going to try to give you a little insight on why we're asking the wrong questions and maybe what things you should be considering if you're trying to prioritize how your car is going to drive and what it's going to feel like so that you can pick the right turbo upgrade for your needs. So let's go ahead and talk about it, and hopefully you guys find this video useful. Now, before we jump into the topic, I gotta ask, what is holding you back from upgrading your turbo? Leave me a comment down below and let me know if it's something as simple as just the cost, you're waiting to save up more money, or maybe it's your driving style and how you use your car, you think it doesn't really make sense, or is there something you're worried about that would ruin the experience? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. But let's go ahead and jump into it. So when you're upgrading a turbo, we know what the biggest question is. How's the lag? Everybody's worried about turbo lag when you upgrade your turbo. And the reason is really simple. Of course, we all hopefully understand how a turbo works, but just in case, the turbo is designed to basically use your exhaust gases to create positive pressure and force that compressed air into your engine. So all of the exhaust gases will spin a turbine wheel at the back of your engine. That wheel is attached to a compressor wheel that will suck in the ambient air, compress it, and then force it back into your engine to create more power. So you're basically recycling some of that wasted exhaust energy to make your car more efficient and increase the performance. So the benefit of this is it works really well. Again, you're just kind of using stuff that would otherwise be wasted to make your car go faster. But the only challenge is there is a little bit of a delay with that process. When you accelerate, the exhaust gases will take time to come out and begin spinning that wheel to compress the air, and then it takes time to get into your engine. So because of that, there is a little bit of a delay. That's what we call turbo lag, and that is basically the time between you hitting the pedal and requesting acceleration versus the time that you actually get the requested torque. That's kind of the slingshot effect that you feel inside of the car. And when you upgrade the turbo, what happens is you're going with a bigger turbo that has a bigger wheel, bigger compressor housing, bigger exhaust housing. So all of that nets more turbo lag. It's going to take more energy to turn over the heavier components and fill up the larger cavity to create positive pressure and get the car to accelerate. So that's the biggest concern. Most OEMs are working on cars with really small stock turbos, so you get instant torque and it spools as quickly as possible. But how bad is it going to be if you upgrade your turbo to the one you're considering? So when we're talking about this, again, one of the most common questions I hear is, when does your car hit peak boost? And this just isn't really the most useful information for a couple different reasons. In the past, with quote unquote more traditional boost controllers, this was a lot more telling because your boost controller would basically request a certain amount of boost, try to get there as quickly as possible, and try to hold it as long as possible. So it was a pretty analog tool to try to make the car make the power you were looking for. And if at any point you tried to accelerate, that's exactly what it would shoot for. Now with modern boost control strategy, it's just not really the same. For example, my car makes around 28 to 29 PSI, and that depends on ambient conditions and stuff like that. But it only makes that power after 6,000 RPM. And if I tell you that a Dynamic AutoWorks hybrid only makes power after 6,000 RPM, you would think I'm insane. But it is a deliberate decision that we're doing because we are trying to manage torque. The car makes boost way lower in the rev range. It usually gets up to around 24 PSI or so as quickly as possible. And then we slowly ramp up to 29 PSI to keep torque at a safe level so that we don't hurt the transmission, but we make as much power as possible towards redline. So it is a very deliberate decision that we're making to protect the drivetrain. So if somebody else is making the same boost much earlier in the rev range, they're going to make more torque than me. Their car is going to have more acceleration down low, but that's the trade-off. You're probably going to need a built transmission or something to take full advantage of that experience. The other thing is, yes, it can translate to peak torque, but it doesn't translate to the first experience of torque. I think what a lot of people are concerned about is boost threshold. Boost threshold is basically going to be an engine RPM range where the car makes no boost at all. So when you floor it, it feels like nothing, nothing, nothing. Then all of a sudden it snaps on and the car begins flying. That's not going to be the case with pretty much any of the turbo options that you're looking at, especially for people that are concerned about turbo lag. If all you care about is breaking records and having the fastest acceleration and the most power and things like that, then you can go with a turbo that has a really high boost threshold because you're never going to be driving it in that range. You're going to be revving up the car with your launch control, getting it as high as possible, and keeping your car above 5,000 RPM as long as you're accelerating and racing. So that's not really something that you're as concerned with. But for people that just daily drive their cars, or they're more concerned about, the highway experience and passing and stuff like that, that is going to be a really critical detail. The challenge is when somebody says this is when I make peak boost, or you look at a dyno chart and see where peak torque is made, it's very easy to assume that that's the only point where you're really enjoying the car, when in reality, the car accelerates very well even below that range. If you really look at the dyno chart, you'll notice that boost is building and torque is building from 2000 RPM all the way up to when it hits that peak torque figure. And all of that is where you're driving your car. So there's really nothing holding you back from still having plenty of acceleration around town. But I will say you do have to drive your car properly. What I notice is a lot of people will just slap their cars and drive, cruise around town, and they say it feels dead. Well, yeah, because you're letting the car shift at 1500 RPM and get to eighth gear at 40 miles an hour. If you keep your RPMs up, then there's absolutely no reason why you should have that kind of experience. In my cars, I personally shift around 2500 to 3000 RPM. I always keep my RPMs above 2000, and that way I always have plenty of acceleration on tap to get wherever I need to go. And especially on the highway, I think a lot of people just want to be able to tap the pedal in eighth gear and take off. And while that sounds nice, not only is it not good for your engine to lug it in that high of a gear, but you have a ZF8 speed. It's not that hard to downshift to accelerate. And again, that's exactly what I do. Just tap your paddle once or twice, accelerate to whatever speed you're trying to get to, and then go back to cruising. So again, just adjusting your driving style and considering where the car is actually accelerating easily will make a lot more sense when you're behind the wheel. It's just a lot harder to describe it when all you're doing is explaining peak boost and staring at a dyno. The other thing I like to highlight is the more boost you're trying to run, the longer it will take. And what I mean by that is as you are accelerating through the rev range, you will notice that the torque curve is climbing up and up. And each spot along that range is a different boost level. So if you're only targeting 20 PSI, it'll take a lot less time than targeting 30 PSI or 40 PSI. And if you ask somebody when they experience peak boost and they're running more boost than you shouldn't be surprised to hear that peak boost is at a much higher RPM than yours. It's really going to depend on a lot of different characteristics. So you can't just say, when are you hitting peak boost, if you don't also know what the peak boost is, because both of those are going to go hand in hand. And then of course we can push all of that to the side when we realize that peak boost doesn't actually mean anything. Yes, relatively speaking, it can give you an idea of if you're increasing or decreasing power, but you can look at a compressor map and easily see that for a given amount of boost, there is a wide range of airflow that the car could actually be making. And depending on ambient conditions and the rest of your setup, it's going to be very different. When I went from a port injection setup to a DI only setup on my 340i, I made more power with 2 PSI less boost simply because airflow wasn't fighting for space in the intake ports with fuel coming in from port injectors. So the car was able to run more efficiently, the turbo was able to make less boost, and all of that air was making it into the engine instead of fighting for space in the small holes with the E85 that was being sprayed in. So I went with less boost and made more power, which is a perfect example of why you can't just say XX PSI translates to YYY horsepower. It's going to be a wide range depending on the rest of your setup, your ambient conditions, and a bunch of other factors that you probably can't control. And even as we mentioned, with a bigger turbo, it's going to flow more air. So at the exact same boost level, my UltraFlow X is not going to make as much power as a 6769 or as a full frame turbo like a 6870 all of those cars at 20 PSI are going to make a wide range of horsepower figures. And so, depending on the fuel you're running and just everything else, there are so many other factors that play into how much horsepower your car is making that is combined with boost to give you the actual resulting performance. So just keep that in mind when you're asking about how a turbo is performing and somebody's setup. It's only one piece of the puzzle and not the only detail you need to make that decision. Then the last thing I want to highlight is response, because at the end of the day, that's what you care about. When you're driving around and you floor it, or even if you're just doing a highway pull, there is always going to be a delay. There is no such thing as a turbo with no lag. And I guarantee you somebody out there is telling you that their car makes 1,500 horsepower and it makes a billion PSI at negative 500 RPM and it can go in reverse faster than you can accelerate forward. And while I appreciate the sentiment, the design of a turbo in principle will always have turbo lag. No matter how small it is, no matter how well designed it is going to have some lag. But that response is really what a lot of people are concerned about. So you want to know, when I put my foot to the floor, how quickly is the car going to be moving? Again, I want to reiterate, if you're like me and you're worried about turbo lag when picking a turbo upgrade, there is little to no chance that the main turbo options that you see on the market are going to be an issue for you. You're going to find that when you put it on the car, the first thought is, why did I wait so long? Once you start driving the car and get used to it, you'll realize that it is an extremely nice experience, and all of that torque down low does translate to running out of steam up top. So with an upgraded turbo and being able to pull all the way to redline, I find it to be a lot more fun. So just keep that in mind. If you're asking about, how the car is driving, try to ask questions about the actual response, especially when you're higher in the rev range. If you're already at, 4,000 or 5,000 RPM and just floor it, how long does it take to get the full acceleration? How does it feel around town when you try to accelerate quickly, even if you're not making 700 foot-pounds, if you just need to pass somebody on the highway? How does it actually feel? And all I've heard from other people that have big turbos is it feels great. At this point, I have yet to hear anybody else that has upgraded their turbo say that, the experience was just so disappointing that they went back to a smaller turbo or a stock turbo. Yes, quicker spool is always great. Less turbo lag would be nice, but there's nothing that's saying that your upgraded turbo setup is not fun to drive. And keep in mind, the big turbo spooling slower is only a thing based on principle. With everything else being equal, yes, moving to a big turbo will make the car spool more slowly. But if you haven't been able to tell recently, we see new turbos come out every 1 or 2 years that are the exact same size or close to it, but spool earlier and earlier and earlier with less and less turbo lag. There are a lot of different things that actually play into it. A big one is the turbo design. So using things like, lightweight turbo wheels and lightweight materials, using ball bearings instead of journal bearings, stuff that allows the turbo just to spool and spin more freely is going to reduce your turbo lag. Another big one is twin scroll design, which I think most turbo setups use, especially since our stock turbo is already twin scroll. That's what the twin power turbo designation from BMW is referring to. So a lot of aftermarket turbo options we see are also twin scroll as well. And that is what allows you to get a turbo that can make 600, 700, 800 horsepower, and it still spools below 3,000 RPM. That's why we're able to get such crazy horsepower figures, because not only is it spooling quickly, but it's running more efficiently so it can carry more steam higher in the revs. So again, all of those details come together to create a turbo that only will perform better than what we've seen in the past, even if it's bigger than what we're used to. So yeah, I feel like I started to ramble on there, so I'm gonna cut it off here. Keep in mind, I will be making more videos in the future talking about my favorite full frame options as well as my favorite hybrid options. So let me know if there's anyone specifically you want me to include on the list. I'll talk about the ones I know, but I know there's a crazy amount of options out there now. So leave a comment and let me know one you want me to talk about so I don't miss it. But for now, let's just agree to disagree that an upgraded turbo is not going to be the end of the world for pretty much anybody that enjoys their car. But otherwise, I think that's it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.